This episode of The Answer is Yes Baja Sessions is brought to you by Baja Bound Insurance Services. Driving to Mexico? You can buy and print out your Mexican auto insurance policy online in minutes with their easy-to-use website. They also have great travel information to help you plan your trip south of the border. Visit bajabound.com.
Welcome to the Baja Sessions show this week. We really appreciate you tuning in. It's not often that I create a second intro to a guest in a show with Baja Sessions. That's normally what I do on the Answers Yes program on Wednesdays. But I feel like this guest that I have on today required a little bit more than just a diving right into the interview with the guests. And if you haven't noticed, I've had Ryan Thomas on the show a few times recently, and he's really been kind of helping me fill in the gaps with some Baja icons and imagery, and he knows the terrain so well. I'm going to continue to utilize Ryan and maybe even have him host some shows on his own because of his vast experience down there. But when Ryan called me last week and he said he wanted to have Bruce Meyers on the show, I was just so thrilled because I have a personal history with Bruce Meyers from an outside, but all the same, it's a history. And I know that the name might not mean anything to you, especially if you're, I don't know, under 30 or 40 years old. But Bruce Meyers is really a special person. And there's an excerpt from Hot Rod Magazine from a writer named Steve Temple, and it reads like this. The Meyers Manx, which he's referring to a vehicle that Bruce Meyers created, is arguably one of the most significant vehicles of the last century, not only for its record-breaking achievements in the 1967 Mexican 1000, but also for capturing the imaginations of countless dune-chasing off-roaders. His Manx is probably the most copied car in history, with literally hundreds of companies imitating the design, if not stealing it outright by splashing the fiberglass body. The Manx is far more than just a VW-based sand rail. It's iconic, a cultural waypoint of the 60s that captures the feel and look of a generation, a vehicular version of the Beatles' music and Peter Mac's art. And again, that was written in Hot Rod Magazine. You know, Bruce Meyers talks about his life in this interview, and you know, Baja is so important to him and who he is and what he did with this vehicle. But this is also a man that had a passion for art and a vision for a vehicle that he was starting to go into production. And ultimately, as that quote just said, his idea was stolen by a number of car manufacturers from around the world. And in this interview, Bruce gets very emotional over that scenario, but more importantly, where he took his life from there. And that's the gold within the interview, and you're just going to have to listen to it to hear the twists and turns of the story. But it was a privilege and an honor to have Bruce on the show and be with him at his home with his wife and his grandkids running around and take a tour of his shop. And just to set the tone about when this Meyers Manx vehicle came out, the tone says it was 1964. A gallon of gas cost 30 cents. A gallon of milk was 95 cents. College tuition was $225. A postage stamp was 5 cents. The Beatles came to America. Fiddler on the Roof came to Broadway. Louis Armstrong sang Hello, Dolly, and Barbra Streisand sang People. And Bruce Meyers, a California artist, surfer, engineer, created the first Dune Buggy named Old Red. So we're going to jump into the interview, Ryan Thomas and I, with Bruce Meyers again in his living room, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I have. We're going to break it into two parts because it's over an hour long, and I just don't want it to drag out too much without a little break in between. So stay tuned, and here we are from Bruce Meyers' living room. Hello, and welcome to this week's Baja Sessions podcast. It's a part of the Answers Yes, which we broadcast on Wednesdays. And today is one of those special opportunities where Ryan Thomas and I are in the living room of Bruce Meyers. And I just want you to sit back, know that this is going to be probably a two-part show. And we're going to learn a lot about a gentleman that has changed many lives and has affected a lot of people. And in the 5 minutes that I've been sitting in the living room, I've already gained a wealth of knowledge about Bruce. And Ryan, you're sitting to my right. And Bruce is cozied up on the couch. We've got the cat running around. It smells like toast in here. And I couldn't be any more comfortable. So Bruce, it's a pleasure to be here with you. Thank you for taking the time out of your day and telling us some of your life story.
You know, you guys coming into my home and doing this is such a pleasure because, first of all, it's a very honorable thing that you're doing. And I don't know that I'm the guy for that. But I feel like you're doing something. That. You're doing something that's touching on history. It seems to me, I was just saying it a few moments ago, that I'm at the beginning of things.
Yeah.
I'm a World War II vet, and yet I've done so many things in my life, and they're so different from one side of my life to another. But I'm not a guy that is about management or concerned about profit. And somehow I just do what I've done as more of a child. I've never really grown up. There's something about that connection of me and my personality that seems to be a big part of why things were successful, like the Dune Buggy. I'm the guy that created the first fiberglass Dune Buggy. Not the first Dune Buggy. Dune Buggies were already here, but they were handmade and they were made out of steel tubing and aluminum and so forth. And that's fine. The only thing they had in common was they all had four wheels and an engine. There was a Volkswagen in the back. From there on, they were as different as the people that created them. I came along with a huge background in the arts. I spent 6 or 7 years in the art world in big city art schools, teaching life drawing, figure drawing, and portraiture. So that is a kind of a sensitivity that goes way beyond the creation of a dune buggy. Most people think of a dune buggy in a mechanical way. It's like I wrote a little book called Bruce Meyers' Call to Baja. And it started off-road racing. Now, writing a book about off-road racing is fine, except that off-road racers don't read books. They'd rather twist the screws on a carburetor. So the problem for me is that I'm getting philosophical when you write books, but the book is all about how that started. The off-road world was simply a handful of little dune buggies putting around in a place called Baja, which had a mysterious something about it, and we were drawn to that because it was all about history. When it went to Ensenada, anything beyond Ensenada, there was no hotel or motel or anybody waiting for you. No gasoline, no nothing. You had to carry it all, and you had to sit in a rancho and wait for the gas truck maybe 2 days from now. So we were wandering around in this mysterious place, mostly interested, for me at least, and my friends, in the history, because missions that were there 200 or 300 years had been put in by men that came around the Horn, down the Atlantic, up the Pacific, and into this place. Here you are looking at this rusting machinery out in the countryside 40 miles from the water. How in the hell did it get there? My God, those guys had grit. Oh, they had huge balls. These guys must have really wanted, and somebody put money up on that. I wonder if they ever made an investment. But digging around looking for gold or whatever they were looking for. And then the other thing was the church. And the religious thing was so strong that old Junipero Serra built a whole bunch of churches. They were supposed to be a day's walk from each other. I have no idea how you could walk that far, but there's 24 of them in Baja, 21 of them in California, 45 altogether. And so the 24 of them in Baja, we wanted to go see them. And we're looking at all this stuff laying around, and they're just mounds of dirt. Some of the churches have been restored and taken care of. There's like 3 great ones, beautiful. And we've been through those. See, so I wasn't there for off-road racing. I was there to examine why Baja existed. And either you had a crossroad where there was a church or a mine. And those guys that dug those holes, my God, how they must have done. They didn't have any fork trucks. They didn't have any steam engines. They were doing everything by hand. And they carried all this heavy machinery 40 and 50 miles from the water. So I was in awe of history. So heard about these guys playing around with motorcycles, and they set a record. The Eakins and their friends. And Ted Mangles, he was with us. He said, I think we can beat those bikes. And I thought, I don't see how you can, because those bike riders are the best in the world. They're movie stunt riders and all that stuff. And he says, no. And he comes to me on an evening when I was shutting down. The people had just gone home from my office. He's got a great big map under his arm, and he crawls around the floor. He says, I've already done this. I'm going to ask you to do it, but put down what you think it'll take to go from this point to this point. 5 miles an hour, 20 miles an hour, 40 miles an hour, whatever. ABC, 1, 2, 3. And he went from the top to the bottom. Took an hour or so. So I did it. I didn't know what his answer was. And when I got all done, my God, you could have feasibly beat the bikes by over 10 hours.
Wow.
The bike riders had done it in something under 40 hours, 39 something. They'd done this twice in 1962 and then again in 64, 2 years later. They only beat their old record by 8 minutes. And yet we beat them feasibly by 10 hours. And I said, you're right, we could do it. And now that was on a Monday night. On Tuesday, I'm standing in my shop looking at the welding bottles. And I take out a book of measurements. A bottle will hold 6 or 7 or 8 gallons or something. And I thought, well, 3 of those will give me 25 gallons. The car holds 15 gallons. That's 40 gallons. Now, we had guessed that maybe it might make 15 miles to a gallon in the buggy with a stock Volkswagen engine. And you'd never be in first, you'd never be in fourth. You're always in second or third gear. So it was really a lot of guesswork. But we guessed that maybe we could go down there in a feasibility run by driving buggies. And we had a couple of others with us as chase cars. I drove during that down there, and then we stop at night. Then our chase
I got to interrupt you.
Go ahead.
This is the very first Baja 1000 pre-run that he's talking about. The very first pre-run, Mr. Bruce Meyers is telling us about it right now.
Didn't even know it.
It's a good thing I'm old.
Well, I'm amazed, Bruce, at your ability to recall things that you recall like they're yesterday. And it's fascinating to sit here and listen to you talk about it. So continue, please.
I've been trying to write a book, and I have to do that. I have to recall something over 50 years ago. I'm right now arguing on the emails with Vic Wilson, who won the very first race. And he says, no. And I say, yes. And so we're arguing about things we can't remember. Okay, back to where I was. What was I talking about? Anyway, we went down there on a feasibility run with Old Red, the original Meyers Manx, #1, and a couple of others that decided to follow us for fun. And we got to Baja, or to La Paz in 29 hours or something. My God, we beat the bikes theoretically by 10 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we got to turn around and go from south to north, back to Tijuana. But we have to authenticate it, and so we go to the people in Mexican authority, and we go to the police station. I explain what I'm trying to do to the police captain, and he listens, and then he says, why? Why what? Why are you trying to do this? Well, because it hasn't been done. Isn't this like the mountain that hasn't been climbed yet? I guess. And he couldn't figure that. He didn't see what that was all about. He says, but if you must do this crazy thing, I think you should go to the tourism department. So he directed us to the tourism department, and we walked in, and they said, yes, we can do this. We have a radio message we can send to Tijuana. We'll tell them that you're leaving as at some moment, and then when you get there, you go into the police station, and they'll say you are now here. So that'll set your record.
Uh-huh.
Well, that's wonderful, except that when we got to the police station, the desk sergeant couldn't speak any English. We spoke so little Spanish, it didn't do us any good. He didn't know who we were. So we had to say, where in the hell is the tourism department? We got in this car now that is so broken. The transmission mount's all gone, and it's running on 3 cylinders, and it's limping, but it still ran. And we limped over to the tourism department, and there's an office sitting there with the door shut, and it says hours 8 to something, and it's now 9 o'clock. We fall asleep. We hear the door being opened at 9:30 or 10, And we walk in and we say, we're the guys that, yeah, I know who you are. He says, you come in now. I said, but we've been in town